I would like to, of course, thank everybody who is a familiar face for your loyalty and support through these 2 years of wonderful literary discussions. As I wrote in my farewell note, we are very disappointed in ScanDesign for pulling their funding, but that was their decision, and we tried to convince them to do otherwise, and they were not convincible. So Desiree has done a ton of work to try to find funding from other sources until we finally said, okay, we're throwing in the gauntlet, or rather not the gauntlet, because that would be a challenge, right? But we're throwing in something, the towel in this case, and we're just giving up. So what I decided to do, because I talked to several of you, was to say, hey, why don't we just do a regular book club for lovers of Danish literature in translation? And we'll just have regular meetings and meet once a month during the 9 months of the year. I won't do any questions. We won't have it recorded. It will not go on any websites. We will simply talk about books that we choose together and that we, take turns talking about or whatever. So not that I can still facilitate because I have access to unlimited Zoom via my university computer account, but I wouldn't be the one that is in charge. Nobody would be in charge. So it would be a totally regular book club. And I can see that Desiree's burning to say something.
I'm not burning necessarily to say something, but I just wanted people to know I haven't given up completely. We have one more contact in a ministry in Denmark, and I think Nita and I are going to try and pursue that route. I've been working on that avenue over the summer, and things have been going very slowly, but just hang in there. If something happens, we will definitely reach out to you if it gets more formalized, and we can continue also with interviews. But until then, I'm completely going to join the book club needed.
Wonderful, because of course, my next point was that what we're going to be missing is Tova's presence, because she's the administrator who's just been in charge of everything running so smoothly, and Desiree's author interviews. So luckily, there's usually something to be found online about the different authors we're choosing, but they will never, of course, reach anywhere near what Desiree has managed to accomplish in her interviews. So in order to continue with that part of the National Danish Book Club, we would need funding. So yes, we are still not completely defeated, but I just wanted you all to know that you are more than welcome to join the next, I don't have a name for it, casual Danish book club, or whatever we want to call it. We can talk about that the first time we meet. And I've asked you to send me an email, and I can tell you proudly that so far we are 10 people who have emailed me to say that they would like to participate. So this is a different kind of, a little bit maybe more committed, because it would be like a regular book club that you show up because you expect everybody else to show up. But 10 people and then me, that makes it 11. That's absolutely fantastic. So yes, we are not going to let those Danish authors sleep in peace. We are going to continue dissecting them and trying to figure out what they're saying. And I do have friends in Denmark who continually feed me with new titles and new authors and say, oh, do read this and do listen to this. I mean, audiobooks have become very popular. So enough about that. Let's talk about Hans Christian Andersen. And of course, it's no serendipity that I chose him for the last hurrah here. I really enjoy Hans Christian Andersen. I have enjoyed him most of my life. I started reading him when I was 7, when my mom thought I was old enough to read The Little Mermaid. And it gave me serious nightmares because I kept visualizing her walking on knives. That was probably what I garnered from reading it at 7 years old. But Hans Christian Andersen, I'm sure you've all read him, or at least most of us have read him. primarily, I think, The Princess on the Pea, The Emperor's New Clothes, those are very, very well-known stories, but there's so many. He wrote a total of about, still arguable, 154 stories, and he lived from 1805 to 1875, so during the height of Romanticism. And yes, you can get his volumes in many, many versions. And of course, you can also get the children-downed versions where everything is very easy and lots of pictures. Then you have the Walt Disney versions, you know, the Snow Queen that turned into Frozen, etc. So you have many approaches if you would like to read Hans Christian Andersen and share him with kids and grandkids. And I think it's perfectly fine and respectable to start with the versions that are a little bit easier. If you think about The Ugly Duckling, it's actually not an easy story to read for kids, whereas the cute little ones where it's just a little duckling wobbling around, those are so much easier. So you get my gist here. It's just really about the level you feel comfortable with. But to start out at a different level, Hans Christian Andersen is really not for children, and he really didn't like children. His first publication was 4 Tales Told for Children. When the second edition came out, he insisted on having Told for Children removed. And from then on, he was a writer of tales. That's important to know. He did not like the fact that he was considered a children's author. And when you've read The Little Mermaid, you probably agree, don't you?
Yeah.
That it's not really for children. So where would you like to start? Anybody wants to start? Yes, Christy.
Well, I'd like to start out by saying that he really did like children. He was oftentimes, because he didn't have a home of his own, he oftentimes was invited to many people's homes for dinner. And if he knew that there were going to be children there, he delighted in bringing them scrapbooks. And his scrapbooks are very famous. There's one in Washington, D.C. at the Library of Congress in the Rare Book Room. There's 2 up in Princeton University in the Children's Library. And there's another one that we've just kind of found out about in the last 25 years. It's out in Oregon. And a friend of mine, Tova, who I've researched and traveled and published with on Hans Christian Andersen, we had a grant to bring this woman with her scrapbook to Washington, D.C. And then we took a trip up to New York to visit an authentic children's literature individual. And she had already been told at the, the program that they have on TV, you know, where they bring old things to the you know what the name.
Antiques Roadshow.
Yeah, it's Antiques Roadshow, yeah. And they told her out in Oregon, oh, this is not authentic at all. And so she came to Washington. We took her up to New York City. I went up there with her and we visited. Absolutely, it was an authentic story, authentic scrapbook. I knew it was exactly when I saw it when I went out there to visit before she came to Washington. And I knew from seeing the one in Washington that it was exactly his work. And her grandmother had brought it over from Denmark, and then it is in her family, and it's still in her family. So he did like children up to that point, agreeable that he did not write necessarily for children. And I do not like his stories. I've done a lifetime of research with Hans Christian Andersen, but I'll share later what my favorite story was, but it's not necessarily one for children, but I'll stop there.
Okay, you do not like his story. Anybody else wants to start out talking about The Little Mermaid? What do you think? The big question, what do you think it's about? Because Walt Disney, let me put that clearly out here, Walt Disney thinks it's about love. And Walt Disney subscribes to happy love and happy endings. Not so Hans Christian Andersen, who, of course, never in his life married. That's right.
I've read it for the last 15, 20 years as a coming of age, venturing into your sexuality, having your first orgasm, all those lovely things. to me, that's what the story is about, under all the layers. But I'm happy to be challenged in that reading.
Hello, everybody. What do you think? Okay, I'll challenge you, Desiree. I think it's about religion. I think it's about Hans Christian Andersen's faith that the immortal soul is the only thing that matters to humankind and merkind. And it actually surpasses love in its attractiveness. So if you want to be anything in this world, you have to be a Christian, you have to be a good Christian, and especially do good deeds, because otherwise you go to purgatory, which is, flying for 300 years plus in the sky. And then if you are a good person, you will be rewarded with an immortal soul.
So you read a lot into the ending and the time it's written in.
Well, I read a lot into the grandmother telling and focusing on the Little Mermaid, asking her grandmother, so why do I only live for the moment and not for eternity? And the grandmother says, well, only if you can find a man who can kind of share his soul with you, will you be able to live more than the 300 years we are frolicking in the ocean. That's why I see, if you look at the movements in the tale, I don't know if any of you thought about that. You kind of start at the ocean floor, then you go up to the surface. Okay, but it's premature. You have to go deep, deep down into the mud and the bog and hell, actually, in order to rise above the surface where you frolic around, like I said, with the prince. And then, where do you end? Da, 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 da.
But isn't that very orgasmic, Nede? And then you die a little bit. Isn't there a saying that you die a little? I'm getting hot here. It's not because of the topic, but
must be, because I've never thought of the Little Mermaid as having any kind of orgasm. Seriously?
Really? Wow. Okay,
Yeah.
maybe I just have a dirty mind. I don't know. It's just,
You do, and I'm pure. I mean, I only have 5 kids, so you just really go up to the sky at the end. Come on, everybody, what do you think? What's this story about?
One of us,
Nancy,
it's about his
unmute yourself.
struggle. It's about his struggle with love.
Struggle with love, Nancy?
I do think it's a very kind of mystical situation in terms of Berlin, and talks a lot about transformation of human existence, even from something baser into something higher. And I think in addition to that, there's quite a bit of social commentary, and I'm not quite sure where that comes in, but there is quite a bit of dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots, and what becomes of them. So my thought.
Great thought, Nancy. Did any of you think about the fact that when that ship goes down, all the sailors drown? Do we hear anything about them? No. And why not? Because the prince was rescued. Yay! And the rest doesn't matter. So a very good comment about the social hierarchy. Also that, of course, the grandmother has, 12 oysters on her tail. Yep, because she's, monarchy, nobility. There you go. So that's really important. That's right.
yeah, I just, so I've been reading Hans Christian Andersen to my son as a thing we do. And last time I read it, I was just, this is a completely different topic, but the emphasis on her pale, light, beautiful skin and her light hair, that time it's written in, I can't help but think after the Roald Dahl thing, what the next translation will be like, because there is also one of the stories we read today, right? They have the skin of mahogany, and it's not connotated necessarily with something bad, but it's definitely the associations with light, pale skin is associated with something very beautiful. So did any of you guys pick up on that? And how did you notice it, or did it make you feel iffy, or did it stand out to you in any way?
Yeah, I noticed it.
If this is your book.
I did notice it, and I found it, momentarily troubling. And then I decided it was very much sort of the condition of the, historical time. And so I was able to dismiss it, but I certainly thought about it for a moment.
Different in
Has
our
anybody seen the Disney movie, The Little Mermaid, that came out this summer? Because she's black in
she's
that
black.
one,
Trailer.
or brown at least. She's definitely not white and blonde.
But that's because of diversity, right? In
Yeah.
the Barbie movie, there's all kinds of diverse people. It's absolutely amazing whom they've gathered. So, okay, yes, Annette.
Well, as we have been discussing books in this group, every book we read, we had some different opinions about the book, but generally we all agreed about what it was about. When you read Hans Christian Andersen, I don't know anybody who can agree about anything about what most of the more complicated stories are about. And I know if you ask me what The Little Mermaid is about, I mean, there could be 10 different things that it's about, and you have to kind of construct what you believe is about based on what you pull out of the story, okay, or different parts of the story. And I guess I just would, when I think about that, I'm not sure if it's because he was a great writer, and so his writing was so complex and multiple layered, or if it was because he wasn't quite sure what he was writing about or what he was trying to say in these things. And I have to tell you, in some of the stories, I think it's the latter. I have not been able to really get an understanding of what was meant. And I wondered what other people have thought over the years as we got away from reading the cute little stories that I was read to as a child and began reading Hans Christian Andersen in translation and multiple translations that there are out there that differ in many ways from each other. What have other people felt about him as a writer, and was he that complex and multi-layered a writer, or what was happening here? I was glad when you said he wasn't writing for children, because that's always bothered me. And I had never heard that before. So it's just, I wonder if that's why we're having trouble answering your question about what it's about.
But Annette, I love that you're saying, yes, there's so many different translations. In English, you can read so many different translations. Danish, not so many. I mean, it's kind of like, okay, this is the original. So I've taught The Little Mermaid previously, and my students would say, oh, but we know that from Disney. And he wrote The Little Mermaid. And, it's kind of like me hammering them over the head with the fact, no, he did a version of The Little Mermaid. Original one is Andersen. But there's another thing I want to throw in there, because I love what you're saying. Yes, you never know where you have him. One other thing that this story is about for me, very importantly, is going against your nature. So it's an existential story, because when we have that dichotomy between humans live on Earth and die in the water, mer people live in the water and die on Earth, then this little mermaid, who is, of course, and everybody is clapping their hands and saying, oh, she's a siren, right? Oh. Because we know that sirens are the ones that use their voice to tempt males to their perdition, and it's sexual perdition, of course. And we think about Ulysses tied to the mast and the sirens. This mermaid is a siren. And when she gives up her voice, hello, Linda, when she gives up her voice to be part of this love story, then she is going against her nature. And the punishment for that is death. So there's just another thought I wanted to throw at you, that you should probably not go against your nature if you want to survive and have a happy life. I don't know if you've thought about that. No.
Maybe also, in addition to going against your nature, going against the social norms or something where that, you know, might be not going well or become quite threatening to somebody if they break away from the cultural norms.
Which is a good point, Nancy, because when her sisters try to rescue her, they give up their power, because we all know that hair is power. Hair is a symbol of power. Just think of Samson. And they give up their power in order to rescue her and bring her back to conformity, to conform with her fate, destiny, which is living for 300 years happily at the bottom of the ocean, not trying to defeat and defy that destiny by going to the surface. So yeah, lots of different aspects of that. That's right.
So I haven't thought about this before, so it might be a little scattered, but your comment made me think, Nede, you know, going against your nature, and her nature is based on childhood trauma. She lost her mom. So maybe the way she reacts, like pursuing this man who doesn't really treat her that well, that is part of her nature, but it's a nature that's been learned or based on this childhood trauma. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't thought about it, but so what if we turn that upside down? And what could that, if that's what she carries with her, how does that manifest in the way she behaves on land towards this prince?
Yeah. We can't hear you, dear. I'm sorry. Tova?
Well, I mean, pondering what Desiree is saying, but also picking up on some of Annette's question about how do we understand Andersen. I think we're familiar with The Ugly Duckling as this kind of semi-autobiographical narrative. Is The Little Mermaid kind of the antithesis of the Ugly Duckling, of the cost of leaving your natural sphere, the cost of aspiring too high, too different, and paying the price of that? It's, you know, is it the other side of the coin of how we prefer to think of, or how we're taught to think of this poor boy in Odense makes good on a global stage, and isn't he lucky? So
and the problem with Hans Christian Andersen is that you bring that up, Tova, because it's so easy to read his own life into all his stories. The easiest way to read Andersen is by saying, oh, he's talking about himself again. Oh, he's the ugly duckling. Oh, you know, he's the emperor's new clothes little child, etc., etc. And that's always been, okay, this is a great way to look at it, not necessarily an academically sound way, but yes, since he did not succeed in love, that's why I think he wrote a story that is not really about love, even though on the surface it's about love. I think he has that there. So I think, like all of you are saying, you can go to this story from so many different angles and find something different. Why, like Desiree is just adding this aspect, why the heck does the prince treat her like a dog? My dumb child. Oh, yuck. You can sleep on a pillow outside my door. Who sleeps on a pillow outside the door? There's a dog. He has men's clothes made for her. What the heck is going on here? Did you think about that? How did you feel about that? She just gave up her life, voice, etc. for him. Of course, he doesn't know that because he's too stupid. But he's the object of her dreams. How did you perceive the prince?
Well, once again, he catered to paternalism. I
Mhm.
mean, but is that the best you can have in a relationship with a man? You know, a paternalistic daddy-o? I mean, he was treating her very paternalistically and having her dress in boys' clothes because maybe women back in that day were so cisgender, they did not go riding, they did not go hunting, they did not, do those things. He considered her more like a little sibling, I think, than a love interest.
And he kissed her on the forehead. That always bothered me. That's not a kiss. That is a daddy's kiss, like you're saying. Come on, do it right. But he doesn't. Okay. Anybody else wants to chime in about the mermaid? I mean, we've talked about a lot. Oh, yeah, the function of that last little paragraph that to me seems as if he added that at the last moment. Oh, maybe I should put in a little kind of admonition to children about behaving themselves, because then the mermaid is so saved. And how did you feel about that? That's always struck me as totally superfluous, a little redundant ending. Or did you all think that was cute?
No, I didn't think it was cute. I joined late because I'm in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and I wasn't getting the internet. But that to say, this disappointed me in that it was really proselytizing. I mean, this whole thing about being saved and having an immortal soul, and that's why you want to be a human. I found that pretty disturbing. And finally, it almost seemed Methodist at the end that you're saved by works, because at the end, she was told that if she did so many good deeds, then she would get to heaven. It's by works, not by works you are saved, but by faith. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, but she could weave her way into heaven by
Yes,
sooner just by being good. So
that's right.
here we are. And as you might imagine, if anybody wants to say anything else about the mermaid, it's now, because otherwise we're moving on with the word good to our next story, the shadow. So, any more comments about our little mermaid, who absolutely does not have a name and is absolutely not Ariel? Seriously. There's another Walt Disney faux pas. Actually, I do have a tangent story there. When I had my third child, it was a daughter, and I wanted to name her Ariel, not because of Walt Disney, but because it's the spirit of the air in Shakespeare's The Tempest. And I think it's a beautiful name. And guess what? My mother said to me, don't you dare, because it is the name of a detergent for your washer in Denmark. And she said, you are simply not doing that to your daughter in Denmark. So I never had an Ariel, but I guess I can get it substitution wise through Walt Disney.
Well,
I had no idea about that. Yeah, but that was a good move, no matter what the reason.
But I've heard that in Denmark, there's a list of names, and if you name your child something that's not on the list, that's like they think is inappropriate, you can apply to have it added, but that you can't name your child some bizarre thing. And
No, Susan, it's changed a lot because of all the immigration. So today, basically everything except probably rosebush or whatever is acceptable. So there's a wide, when my kids were baptized, I wanted to call my son middle name Cameron, and we had to apply for permission. This was 1989, but today it's changed a lot.
well, if you had wanted to name your daughter Ariel in Denmark, would they have not allowed that because it was the name of the detergent?
Yes, they actually would have allowed it, but my mom prevented that. Yes. So much for mothers. Let's go to shadows. All right. And the reason that I wanted to hook it on to the word good is that the philosopher writes about everything that's beautiful, true, and good. And what we see in the shadow, of course, is some kind of failure of what's true and beautiful and good to win over the world. So my wonderful open question again is, how did you find this story? Did it make you think about Star Wars, Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, good, bad, the Bible, good and evil? What did it make you think of?
It made me think of the Twilight Zone, because I think there's an episode of The Shadow, and a lot of what I hear, with and read with Hans Christian Andersen is like people have lifted his what do you call them, witticisms, the sunny side of the street, clothes make the man, and who knows what the shadow knows. That comes almost right out of his tale. He's really
Good.
contemporary, very contemporary.
Like green is good for the eyes, as in the little duck, ugly duckling. Okay, Desiree.
Well, it made me think of the way we perceive the world. If he writes about the good and the truth, but everything is changing places in his story. Who is what is what here? It's and of course it made me think about the world and politics and all that, but everything was turned upside down. And even though he Andersen puts in his narrating voice sometimes, I still couldn't figure out whether he wanted to steer me and guide me to a certain perception, or like if he's playing with us. But it definitely made me think about what is up and down, and what is black and white, and what is black and white, and what is right and wrong. Yeah.
What do you think of the shadow? I could also point out that Andersen is a master of description, that his description of flowers, street life, just cities, people, everything around him, nature and cityscapes, his description are always marvelous and very detailed. He sets the scene, and then the shadow arrives, and it grows, and the sky is from the north, and he's pale, like we heard, and the shadow grows, and then the shadow finds a life of its own. I could also ask you, do you know any other stories with similar themes as those that Andersen had in The Shadow? Can you think of that?
There are a number of mythologies that have sort of the same kind of discussion about, what is a shadow. In most, they find the shadow to be quite sinister, although some seem to see it kind of as the boundary between the seen and the unseen worlds. And I don't see a way for any Disneyfication of that particular story. So that's a good thing.
Yes.
Well, I found it interesting how the shadow describes like his fully becoming alive through the agency of reading and knowledge acquisition. And that seems to be very separate from any acquisition of morals or ethics. And so there's this tree of knowledge vibe of, the dangers of knowing too much, the dangers of knowing all. And so it's really hard to decide if there's any good guy in this one or any justice.
Mm-hmm. But Tuva, may I answer just briefly before you, Desiree? If you read it with a view to that knowledge, then all the shadow does is say, I know it all, I've seen it all. And when the philosopher says, well, did you go into the inner chamber? No, I had to stay outside. There was way too much light in there for shadow. Mm-hmm. So in other words, the shadow has learned absolutely nothing from the 3 weeks, where he says that he's learned more in 3 weeks than in 3,000 years other people do, because he never moved away from the antechamber, the hallway, and that's where he stayed. And then you really raise an interesting point in the story. What does the shadow know? It does not come from reading and learning. What does it come from? Where does he get his knowledge? Does anyone remember?
I read it today before supper, so no, I don't remember.
Tova, hello, Desiree.
I think he says that he learned a lot from the person who once was his master. After
That's what
all, he was attached to him. I think he says something along those lines.
But he doesn't learn anything from him, Desiree.
Oh, sorry.
That's-
But I
Does.
was, no, I was thinking about something else because you asked if we had seen that way of describing things. I think something along those lines you asked before. And then I was like, I remember it said something about that it like a plant, it must have had its root still so a new shadow could grow out. I'm just paraphrasing, I'm reading it in Danish. But and then I was thinking about the mother, where she has these jars and things grow, and also in the Snow Queen. Again, it's been years since I read them, but that's splinter. He plays a lot with those things that are broken off or growing into, and then nature both being good and evil or unpredictable or something like that, I think.
And can I just go back to my previous, I totally agree with you. He plays with that. He learns from looking through windows. Do you all remember? He looks through windows because he can creep up both the back window and the front window. And what does he see? He sees everything that people don't want him to see. And he sees everything that's evil in this world. Abuse between husband and wife, between parents and children. He sees all the bad things. So what is he? How did he get his riches? Well, he's a common blackmailer. He sends letters to the people whom he saw, and he threatens them. That's how he learned. And that's the essence of his learning. So everything evil is collected in the shadow, who is black, and that's how he thrives, still being very thin, but being hung with jewelry, gold, and very fancy clothing. Now, that is where I really want you to stop and think. So what is that juxtaposed to? And of course, you say, oh, everything that's true, beautiful, and good, which he never learned from the philosopher, right? Because he was cut off and didn't learn it. He learned his own lesson about what's evil and bad and negative and can be used to extort money from people. Hooray. Okay, so one more thing I just have to tell you, which you may not know, you may know it, but Andersen was deeply in love with the son of his benefactor, Jonas Collin. The son was called Edvard Collin. And at some point he wrote to him and said, can we please be using the familiar DU form? In Denmark, you have a DU form, U, and then you have the very formal DE form, D. And he wrote to Edvard Collin, and what Edvard Collin answered is verbatim in the story, namely that some people feel that they can't bear the touch of somebody scraping against a plate or a piece of cloth, and that's how I feel when you suggest that you and I should be on familiar terms. So this was something that Andersen never forgave and never ever forgot or forgave. I mean, in the sense that he still liked Edvard a lot, but he wanted to be on familiar terms with him. This is what the shadow uses to establish his sovereignty and superiority. I will say du to you, and I mean, it's like du and usted in Spanish, and or sir, in English. You will say di to me. That way I'm above you and will remain above you. So tell me, everybody, how do you feel about evil winning?
I thought it was pretty real that the sieve of life was filtered and the evil came through, and that finally the materialism of what the shadow was fascinated by, the boots, the jewelry, the this, the that. So, I mean, it seems very contemporary, this story.
That's a great comment, Glenda. I mean, very relevant. What wins today? Evil. Hey, nobody's here optimistic and What about the princess? Why was she so blind? The problem was that she saw too clearly. She thought. What did you see as her real problem? Did she see too clearly? No, I'd say no. I think she doesn't see at all. That's why she's duped by the shadow. And it seems to me that it's also a story about humanity, because when the philosopher answers the princess's questions and shows his humanity, that's when he really signs his own death warrant. That's it. The shadow has to get rid of him because he's too human and too good and too beautiful and too true. And that's not what survives in the world. So in that sense, you know, he wrote The Mermaid in 1840 and this one in 1847. It's kind of like a lot has happened maybe in his life to turn him in such a dark direction with the shadow. The stories I was thinking about also is Peter Pan, who has a shadow that does not let itself be attached lightly. We have the picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. We have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. There's the distillation, right, of human nature and good and evil. Those are classics. And I would say they have the same themes as this story, which is based upon a German book by an author he met called Schlemiel, Peter Schlemiel's story about, which is about a man who loses his shadow that he actually read in 1831 and was inspired by. So yeah, there you go on one of his travels. And that, of course, is a segue into the last story, unless anybody wants to add to the shadow. The last story that's about traveling. Just a little introduction. Andersen traveled 29 times in his lifetime, more than anybody else. Imagine yourself getting into a stagecoach drawn by horses on gravel roads and going from Copenhagen to Milan and Rome.
Turkey.
Italy was
Turkey.
yeah, it's just amazing how much he loved to travel down south to the sun. He stayed there for months because the trip took over a month. So rattling along in this stagecoach. And one more thing, he was deadly afraid of the dangers of traveling. He always thought he was going to be found dead in his bed in the morning. And so he had a note lying on his pillow saying, "I'm not really dead." If he just looked dead. And the other thing he was really afraid of was fire. So he always brought a rope with him and hung it out a window in his room before he went to bed. So yet, in spite of those phobias, he traveled more than anybody else. And he wrote about Under the Willow Tree, traveling away from what? So now, come on, everybody, what is this last story about? Apart from traveling, of course. Susan, say something.
I didn't
I
read the
think-
stories. I had no idea there were stories to be read.
Okay.
Did an email go out or something? Or
Oh yeah, ages ago.
oh, I guess I didn't get it. I don't know. I'm just listening because I've read some of his stories and I've read some of them in English and some of them in Danish, but not these particular ones.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Uh,
I chose the story because it's about traveling and it's about being Danish. And I thought that that would be such an appropriate ending to this these 2 years of Danishness. That's right.
Well, not very deep reading. An obvious one would be like if you try and run after your memories, you can do that for the rest of your life and then never live life. And then you'll die a very cold person.
Desiree, really?
Yeah, I know. Really bad punchline.
Well, I mean, it depends on what memories you chase. Though people tend to remember the bad thing that's happened more than the good things. It's an evolutionary trait that helped our survival, so that we would avoid bad experiences in the future. But when it's carried to the extreme, people only remember the bad things and not the good things, and it can become very bitter. Yes, I agree with Desiree.
Yeah,
This
because
is
in
about
this case,
remembering
he's trying to chase his good memories, and that doesn't bring him anything
No.
good.
No, it doesn't either,
memory.
because memories are past.
Yes, but thinks, okay, and I think this is really what sticks with me, you know, why I asked you the question, is the motto of this story, silent love leads to unhappiness. And he is so trying to go against that, the gingerbread people. He does not want to end up broken in half like the gingerbread lady. He wants to pursue his love. He speaks up. And I see that as being so strong. And then she, Johanna, puts him down and says, oh, but you're like a brother to me. And then, of course, she is so high. Did you notice when he climbed up to visit her in her house in Copenhagen, he had to climb all those stairs and it was dizzying. Not only does he climb, she has her own room. She has her own independence, her own finances, her money, her status. She has it all. He can never, ever reach her. And yet he says, okay, will you be my wife? And she says, no. I'll be your sister. And then he has to run away from the bad, yes, momentarily bad, but also the good memories he had when he, for sure, almost buying a ring, saw her as his betrothed and little wife, and so on. So it's also a story about, like we talked about before, classic, you know, the class distinction, the up and down, the ones who turn rich and the ones who stay shoemakers and stay with their last. That's right.
And then we're back to reading these stories with Andersen's life in mind, right? Because if you speak up, you get a letter back that I don't feel comfortable with you saying do to me, or being kissed on the forehead as if you were some little pet or little sibling, or you know, they all tie, if we read it like that, they all tie together that he might dare to say things, to do things, to be vulnerable, but that also makes him weak in some people's eyes, and it makes him weak in terms of his love life that never ended up working, even though he maybe voiced in writing what he really felt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the willow tree really kind of suggests that there is no win. You know, you can't take the lesson of the gingerbread people and win, and you can't silently stay devoted to your love to the rest of your life and win. So there is no, is the great motto that there is no happy ending? Is that it?
That's
Okay,
great.
if I may interject something that I learned about him. I'm in another book club and we're reading his fairy tales in Danish. But as the moderator or teacher said, that he did not learn to read until he was like 14 years old. He was very poor and he was illiterate, and he was 14 years old, and he was put in a class to learn to read and write with children. And
It's not true, Susan.
It's not true. So that is just a story. Okay. That's what I was told. I'm not.
He went to school twice a week, 2 days a week with the children's school in Odense, where he's from, and he learned to read and write. And when he was 14, he went to Copenhagen, and that's where he was put into the so-called Latin school, which is kind of like, middle school and high school. And that's where he was way older than the ones that started,
Okay.
who were 7. Yeah, but he didn't know how to read and write, because when
Okay.
he came to Copenhagen, he started producing, and they were horrible plays filled with misspellings. He never really learned how to spell.
That's a
in his
spell.
life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Ash first.
Yeah, I wondered, I read somewhere a long time ago that Hans Christian Andersen had a crush on the Swedish opera singer Jenny Lind,
Yes.
and she never reciprocated. And so I wonder if this story is related to that.
It is. Yeah, I was really going to mention that, because she wrote him a note that said, no, 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 we're always friends, my dear brother.
Mm.
So there was very same words. Yes.
Mm.
So he used his love life as inspiration, his love life,
Yeah.
as inspiration for his stories. And Jenny Lind, the Swedish Nightingale, was here. He wrote the Nightingale for her also.
Oh.
Christy.
Yeah, also he went to Sorø Academy. You know, he was kind of a misfit when he went to Copenhagen, and the rich people in Copenhagen put together some money to send him down to the Sorø Academy, for which he was really not prepared for, because he hadn't gone to Real school, he hadn't had the basics. So it was a really frustrating experience for him. And then there's more to that too that I won't go into right now. But is anyone participating in the symposium that's going on right now? There's 4 parts. One was last week. Another one is tomorrow morning at 3 o'clock in Eastern time. And there's 2 more. There's 4 altogether, and they're from scholars all around the world. Last week there was somebody from talking about Germany, England, France, and how Andersen influenced literature in those countries. And then there's going to be 2 more sections after that. It's very worthwhile. You can look on the Sunday newsletter that we get about Denmark and things that are going on in Danish America, and you can get the information there. But they're very worthwhile, very, very interesting. But I also want to point out that when quite a few years ago, actually, we had major Hans Christian Andersen conferences. They were international conferences, and we had week-long sessions, and it was just fabulous. And the major topics, there was one group that was just, knockout, drag-out conversations on 2 major subjects. And I would go in and listen for a while, and then I thought, this is enough of this, and I'm just going to get out. But the 2 topics were, one was whether he was gay or not, and the other one was whether he was of royal blood. It's a big topic also, that's because his mother was a maid in some of the places where there were royalty, and so those were 2 big questions, because many of his stories are about unrequited love and all his problems with girlfriends. Hans Christian Andersen is my dearest boyfriend, and one time I had a party and I signed it Christy and her boyfriend. And of course, everybody was wondering who that was. And so it was Hans Christian Andersen, and I have a room that's dedicated to him. I have many, many, many books. I don't know where they're going to end up. Maybe they'll end up at the museum in Elkhorn. I don't know if they want them or not, but I have been collecting for years. The one story that I must share with you is on travel. And while I don't care for his stories, there is one story that I thought, this would be a wonderful topic for an entire semester at the university. And I was privileged to do that. And the story is Årtusinde, in 1,000 years. And he wrote about what it would be like if you lived in the United States and you had ancestors that came from Europe, what it would be like to take an Airbus in the 1850s, take an Airbus to Europe to see. And then it's like a tour of Europe. And it's fabulous. And the whole course was an interdisciplinary course. And we just had the best time. They made scrapbooks and all kinds of stuff. We learned so much about Europe and about the time, because it's very intellectual, the people that he gathered together in that story. It's worth looking up. And I think that's absolutely my favorite story of Hans Christian Andersen. And there's just so much. Well, and also his challenges with religion, with Kierkegaard, that's a whole element also of his conversations and disagreements with Kierkegaard. And So there's just so much to Andersen. It's just really a fascinating topic. I live in a senior community and they have internationals time, and I think I haven't really thought who wants to know about Denmark, and I didn't know what I could bring to the table, but I'm gonna, because I have puppets and dolls and all kinds of memorabilia with Hans Christian Andersen in addition to his books and his travels. Also, I had a grant and I traveled with him. It was just after my husband died, and they said, "Are you going by yourself?" And I said, "No, I'm going with my boyfriend." It's Hans Christian Andersen, and I was mostly in Italy. And he has an entire book. There's a work of all his artwork. And so I went to the places where he sketched and then took pictures of how they appear today. And then I did a comparative study on that. And it's fascinating. They look exactly like he painted them today. And so there's lots
Kristen,
of...
I have to stop you, dear, because it's past 8 and we have to stop this book club. But thank you for sharing. I think that the end of the story shows that it was not a happy life that Knut pursued, and that he did not find his happiness. And maybe, as his parents said, it's because he's not real Danish, because he
Yes.
didn't stay in Denmark and he had just left them behind. And so they really couldn't care less about his destiny. Now, that's a very sad ending, but that's kind of what they said. I don't want to leave you with the same kind of feeling about Danes, that if you're not in Denmark, we don't care about you. So that's why I will repeat my invitation to keep coming to book clubs about contemporary and classical Danish authors by sending me an email and saying that you would like to participate. Then I will write back and we will lay out a plan. Once again, thank you to all of you for participating. Thank you to Tova for officiating. Thank you to Desiree for interviewing. And thank you to you all for making my Tuesday evenings so joyful so many times.